Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Baster Romani. On behalf of the Leiden Cleveringa Committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the main auditorium of the university. It was here in this very spot that Professor Cleveringa held his protest speech against the dismissal of Jewish staff members yesterday, 85 years ago. We've come together in remembrance of that act of resistance and those of his colleagues, Barge at the medical faculty and the theologian Van Holk. Our meeting is hybrid. We have a group attending in person here and a much larger group following us online from all over the world. Welcome to all of you. Remembering Cleveringa is perhaps more important now than ever. There is a great deal going on in the world at the moment, and anger and frustration about high numbers of civilian casualties is understandable and justified. It's good to see students getting involved. However, it saddens me that this year's Cleveringa professor could not deliver her inaugural lecture here yesterday, as was the intention. It had to be moved to another location due to protests. I readily agree with our rector Magnificus that allowing different voices to be heard is in the spirit of Cleveringa. But I would counter that the attempt to silence other voices goes very much against this spirit. In a democracy, we may expect more willingness also from the part of protesters to listen to others and respect them and their views. In addition, it's also important that everyone should have the opportunity to speak. In this context, Cleveringa invoked an important principle in his speech. The Constitution, he stated, declares every Dutch citizen eligible for any public office, dignity or position, and grants them, regardless of religion, the same civil and citizenship rights. In that spirit, let us not exclude anyone at this university on the basis of religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or I would add, nationality. As usual, Leiden University Fund prepared a video message about the university to all alumni and others attending Cleveringa lectures all over the world. And we will show that video also here.
Niemand begrijpt hoe ik me voel. Ik probeer het uit te leggen aan mijn ouders, mijn therapeut, mijn vrienden. Maar hoe kunnen zij mij helpen als ik het zelf niet snap?
De dokter zegt dat de behandeling heel belangrijk is, maar ik vind het zo eng.
Thuis ging het niet goed. Papa en mama maakten steeds ruzie, hele erge ruzie. Ik was zo bang dat er iets heel ergs zou gebeuren.
Het is zo donker in mijn hoofd. Het is niet eens verdriet, meer een soort leegte. Het is alsof er twee versies van mij zijn. De ene wil vechten, maar de ander geeft het op.
Nu woon ik bij een pleeggezin. Ik mag niet meer thuis wonen, maar ik mis mama zo. Er zijn allemaal grote mensen die met me willen praten, maar ik weet niet of ik dat durf. Wat als ik vertel wat er is gebeurd? Straks mag ik mama nooit meer zien.
Ik wil gewoon dat alles weer wordt zoals het was.
Mijn naam is Arno Roest, tienercardioloog in het LIMC. Samen met mijn collega Anne de Pachter onderzoek ik hoe we kinderen en hun gezin beter kunnen begeleiden. Voor, tijdens en na een zware medische behandeling. De jeugd heeft de toekomst. Maar juist nu staan de mentale en fysieke gezondheid van jongeren onder grote druk. Zeker voor kinderen die extra kwetsbaar zijn door een onveilige thuissituatie, mentale problemen of een ernstige ziekte. Daarom zetten wij ons samen met andere onderzoekers van de Universiteit Leiden in voor structurele verbeteringen en gelijke kansen voor ieder kind. Wetenschap maakt dat mogelijk. En uw gift aan het LUF Kinderfonds geeft ons de kans om deze kinderen een betere toekomst te bieden. Uw steun geeft hoop.
Children have the future, so I warmly recommend this initiative. Let me now introduce today's subject. We will discuss the fragility of democracy and what we can do about it. In the aftermath of the Second World War, democracy became the assumed norm across Western Europe, the natural order of things, so to say. But recent global developments have shaken that confidence, reminding us of a difficult lesson from the 1930s. Democracy is not invincible. It can be eroded from within and from outside. In fact, as Aristotle warned even much longer ago, when the rule of law is neglected, democracies become dangerously susceptible to demagogues. A democracy can in fact destroy itself. We will start today with 3 short presentations about the threats to democracy from inside, outside, and we discuss what we can do about it within academia and in society in general, how we can make democracy strong. Those talks will be followed by a debate, first among the speakers and later with all of you, and those joining online can use the WhatsApp number provided to pose their questions. Our moderator tonight is Lisa Schroeders. Lisa is a final year student of political science. Last year she was a board member of Quintus, a Leiden student society, and she also did a lot of debating within that society. She is very much into tonight's subject, so I will now give her the floor and she will introduce the 3 speakers.
Thank you, Bas, for introducing me. And good evening, and again, a warm welcome to this year's Leiden Cleveringa Meeting. It's an honor to serve as your chair tonight as we gather in the spirit of Professor Cleveringa, whose courage, high moral, and striving for justice must inspire us all. Tonight, we will ask some urgent and difficult questions. Is our democracy under threat? How vulnerable is our democratic system today? Which internal weaknesses and external pressures should concern us most? And what must we do to strengthen democratic resilience? To guide us through these questions, we are fortunate to have 3 distinguished speakers with us tonight, each bringing a unique perspective. First, prof.dr. Sarah de Lange. After having taught at the University of Amsterdam, Sarah returned to the city where she once studied as a professor of political science at Leiden University. Her work on party politics, populism, and political extremism provides crucial insight into how democratic systems respond to pressures from within and how political competition itself is changing. Second, prof.mr. Ferd Grapperhaus, former Minister of Justice and Security, and at this moment, Professor of Rule of Law, Society and Legal Practice at Erasmus University. He currently holds the position of Chair of Governors of the Board of Governors of Leiden University. He will help us with an insight about the pressure on academic freedom and the coherence with our democracy under threat. And third, Dr. Marenne Mei Jansen, a specialist on international security issues, whose research addresses the delicate balance between democratic oversight and military responsibility. She works at the Ministry of Defense as a Deputy Director, Strategy and Research, where she is responsible for the central strategic direction and future planning through foresight and research. Her perspective invites us to consider how security, defense, and democratic norms interact. I want to thank all three of our speakers for being with us this evening. And with that, I would like to invite you to join me in exploring the democracy under threat. And I would like to give the floor to the first speaker, and we will start with Professor Sarah. Democracy under threat, or perhaps more accurately, democracy in decline. A global network of political scientists united in the VDEM project monitors the quality of democracy across the globe. And their 2025 report, which includes the data for 2024, has some alarming results. Today, the world has fewer democracies than autocracies for the first time in 20 years. And the number of liberal democracies, so those democracies that are not only having free and fair elections, but also have protected individual rights and freedoms, rule of law and separation of powers, has declined to 29. Now, you might hope that the Netherlands is amongst those, and that is indeed the case, but it only comes in at position 20 of 29. Currently, 3 out of 4 citizens in the world live in autocracies, and that is the highest percentage since 1978. And especially the latter figure is salient. We have reached a level of democracy across the globe that is lower than before the fall of the Berlin Wall, before the end of the Cold War, and the supposed end of history as declared by Francis Fukuyama, who believed that that moment in 1989 signaled the end of history in the sense that liberal democracy had prevailed over different forms of totalitarianism. Now, amongst the countries that are backsliding in the world, you will find many familiar names. And in this graph, in the darkest red bar, you will see countries such as Russia, Madagascar that recently experienced a military coup, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Central and Eastern Europe, where democracy is declining. But far more important than the dark red bar that you see, where we find the countries that are currently on the watch list, where things have really deteriorated in the last year, is perhaps this cluster of countries here. Oh, it has moved. The group of countries slightly above the yellow circle. Because although we assume that democratic backsliding takes place in countries that have less consolidated democracies, think of the Central and Eastern European countries that only have been democracies for a couple of decades. Think of Latin American countries such as Argentina and Brazil, and even Chile at the moment, that are experiencing the challenge of far-right presidential leadership. We also see democratic decline or the early warning signs of democratic decline in the most consolidated democracies of our world. And that is not only the United States with its presidential system that is particularly susceptible to that, but it's also Spain, Portugal, Italy, and yes, the Netherlands. And the Netherlands has declining liberal democracy scores on 2 particular indicators that are especially relevant in the context of commemorating Cleveringa. Because the 2 indicators on which the Netherlands scores lower in recent years are academic freedom and freedom of expression. And why is this the case? Because from politics, from political parties, both far-right parties that I study, but also the mainstream parties that are affected by their rise, a politicization of science takes place in the sense that individual researchers, research projects are criticized because of the motivations and the supposed ideological leanings of scholars, because there's increased interference of the state in the governance and the substance of universities. And in terms of freedom of expression, because there's more and more political pressure, also from political parties and their followers, on journalists, on the freedom of expression of individual citizens, especially in the social media sphere. Of course, in the domain of the freedom of expression, there are also factors that are unrelated to politics and political actors. One of the key factors in the Netherlands is, for example, the conglomerates that are currently structuring our media landscape. So the fact that a lot of different media outlets, TV, media, etc., are at the end of the day owned by the same corporations. These more political developments certainly also have an impact. The VDEM project argues that the rise of anti-pluralist parties, that is their name for what are essentially far-right parties, is one of the main contributors to democratic decline. And I think we've also been able to observe that in the Netherlands in the past year, now that a far-right party was in government, and the far-right as a whole was therefore also emboldened, not only in our parliament, but also in our public sphere. And what is particularly concerning is that the ideology of far-right parties hinges on a number of ideological pillars that are inherently anti-pluralist in nature. It's their nativism, so that is a very xenophobic form of nationalism that argues that any non-native citizen is by definition a threat to society. And it's their authoritarianism that stipulates that society should be strictly ordered and that any kind of infringement on hierarchy and rules should be severely punished. And that is not only in terms of formal rules and regulations, but also in terms of norms and traditions, hence the antagonistic nature towards other lifestyle choices, for example. So in that sense, it's also anti-pluralist. So it's no wonder that far-right parties play a really important role in the processes of democratic backsliding that we're currently experiencing. 2025, the year in which the far-right was in government in the Netherlands, is not yet included in these data. So we shouldn't be surprised if the data for the coming year will be even more concerning, especially where it concerns the Netherlands. Thank you. Thank you for your insight. Then I would like to give the floor to the second speaker of this evening, and that is Mr. Ferd Grapperhaus.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, being an alumnus of the University of Amsterdam and being a professor in the University of Rotterdam, you can understand why I was requested to be president of the governance board of Leiden. But of course, it is a very great honor to be here and to give a very short lecture to you. Academic freedom is under pressure. In a time when the powerful claim that their resources and their monopoly, they have developed, together with their cronies, a habit to disqualify science as mere opinion. Science, in my view, is knowledge gathered and enriched under fully verifiable conditions, without non-scientific predetermined assumptions. But these people, they challenge such knowledge. It even goes beyond scientific output. A habit has developed in some circles to knock down proven facts with conspiracy theories. Researchers are made suspicious or attacked. Think what happened to researchers such as Marion Koopmans. Academics as well as academia are increasingly expected to adhere and even confirm to the demands of the strongest. And that poses a direct threat to the role of the university in society. Academic freedom means that staff at scientific institutions can conduct their research freely, publish their findings, and provide impartial scientific education about them. Not only must the subject be unbiased, but the researchers themselves must also never be a cause for exclusion. As Professor Cleveringa referred to in his famous lecture of November 1940, according to the principle of equality that he quoted, everyone is equal under the law. And in these times, that also means including the practice of science. Anyone who denies someone access to free scientific activity acts contrary to that principle. Freedom of education and academic freedom form a pillar of the rule of law, and it cuts both ways. They give teachers the space to educate students without prejudice, and it provides students with the knowledge to independently judge society and the education they get. But they also ensure that researchers can work without bias. The banner of this university, as well as of any good university. Good education develops critical thinking, enables citizens to resist demagoguery and misinformation. And I'm thinking back, and maybe, Laurent, you can put on my first slide. Laurent and I know each other, as at least that's what he claims. You never know. And I'm thinking back to my teacher, French, in school, Father Curris. And tonight there is one of my schoolmates here, so this must be moving for her as well, Alexandra. He was a socially conservative Jesuit, but he taught us to think critically using l'affiche rouge, the red poster, which is a poem by the staunchly communist poet Louis Aragon. The poem was about a disgusting poster with Nazi propaganda depicting resistance fighters as criminals, as foreign and Jewish enemies. Public, in France, it is one of the disgraces of France's Second World War history, turned away, didn't want to know it. Practically no one stood up. And I point to this anecdote for two reasons. First of all, my conservative teacher, Father Curris, taught us both history and art through the lens of an avid communist, Aragon. And that's what I call education, because he put academic freedom above his own opinions, and that is essential. Secondly, I want to bring this to your attention because of the turning away. It is always nice to have some music. The turning away eventually recurs with every form of erosion of freedoms, including the gradually hollowing out of free education. We heard it from Sarah already, how things are developing, and I give this as sort of a warning. The 1930s in Germany show how the eradication of academic freedom gradually led to poor science and, even worse, to a dumb people who are easily manipulated. Modern examples also point to risk. Think of the attacks on academic freedom in the US. leading to unusual interventions, leading to, last week, reconsideration by the institution on vaccines of previously steadfast conclusions. This was around vaccines and autism, undermining not only important knowledge, but in fact undermining science as a whole. Now, the university has the task of defending the banner of freedom, not looking away, but standing up for impartial research. And academic freedom must be protected within the rule of law. That ensures that academia continues to provide a counterbalance to those autocratic and simplistic forces. We are, with our hearts and mind, interested in science and not in the trillion bonus of some sort of tech. And politicians and administrators also have the duty not to look away and to safeguard the freedom of academia against conspiracy theorists and anyone who pursues interests of his own, interests other than purely scientific ones, in order to intervene or even influence those universities. And I think it's clear that it's to the benefit of the future of society in the world that we stand tall for academic freedom. Laura, pay attention. My second slide, please. So don't look away. This was an exam question on an English school, and you see it. You fell on the playground and scratched your knee. And the right answer was get up and deal with it. And that's what we have to do. Thank you very much.
Also, thank you to you, Mr. Ferd Grapperhaus. And as the last speaker, I would like to give the floor to Marenne Mei Jansen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here today. Today's title, Democracy Under Threat, captures the urgency of our discussion. And I was asked to cover military and non-military threats worldwide in about 8 minutes. Yeah, the truth is that today's threats are too broad and too intense for any 8-minute window, but I will give it a try. And I timed it, so I don't have time for jokes. I really need to focus on my text. I'm sorry for that. I will start with some information about the geopolitical backdrop, the major threats that we face, what they mean for the Netherlands, our allies. And finally, I will talk a bit about the increasingly blurred gray zone and our response options to it. So let me begin with identifying 3 major trends that bind today's security environment. First, the international order is increasingly shaped by rivalry between major powers. The liberal, rule-based order, as we knew it, is eroding, as Sarah already pointed out. Power shift is shifting toward a world in which power overrides rules. The second trend is that internal and external security have become inseparable. Domains such as security, economics, technology, climate change, and migration now overlap. So challenges cross borders and they spill easily from one domain into others, testing both national resilience and collective defense. The third trend and final that I want to talk about, there are more, is that Europe remains heavily dependent on the United States in crucial areas. And if we want to meet today's security challenges, Europe must take on greater responsibility for its own defense. So taken together, these trends show that we are living in a period marked by uncertainty, rapid change, and the return of major power competition. This places a greater and more urgent demand on our armed forces. Now, I would like to turn to the map, so maybe I also need some help from the back. So, show my slide. because it shows the areas in which the Dutch armed forces carry some responsibilities. And we must begin to talk about Russia. Tensions between Russia and the West have reached historic heights. And even if the war in Ukraine was about to end tomorrow, Russia's long-term confrontation with the West would continue. Moscow views this struggle as total. It's not limited to the battlefields and is fought across societies, economies, and information spaces. Russia does not act alone. China provides political backing and critical technology. Iran, North Korea supply weapons, ballistic missiles, and even troops. Together, these states form a strategic bloc that challenges Western security. Beyond Europe, and instability elsewhere affects also our security. Maybe I should stop here for a minute and say that I do not want to panic you tonight. I just want to give you the information that was collected by our intel services and intel services of our allies. But yeah, instability beyond Europe. In the Caribbean part of our kingdom, developments in Venezuela remain a concern, as well as the U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean. In Africa and the Middle East, so the second green part, insecurity and human suffering continues to rise. The civil war in Sudan has developed over the past year into possibly the most devastating conflict in the world. In the Sahel, West Africa, there is a proliferation of military takeovers and major power presence of both Russia and Chinese organizations grows at the continent. Additionally, the consequences of climate change will have a major impact on stability and prosperity. These developments threaten regional stability and can have direct consequences for Europe. They drive irregular migration, they can drive that, organized crime and extremist network. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, it has entered a new phase. The ceasefire in Gaza is far from stable. Iran's direct missile attacks on Israel marked a sharp escalation. And these wars fuel proxy wars in the region that threaten maritime routes and global energy supplies. In the Indo-Pacific, China's ambitions to reshape the global world order is becoming increasingly visible. Tensions over Taiwan intensify. And in 2024, China conducted major military exercises designed to pressure the island. A conflict over Taiwan would have enormous global consequences. It would disrupt global supply chains, especially semiconductors, as we've seen with the Nexperia case, and could ignite a wider regional conflict involving other major powers. What you do not see on the map is the space domain, also increasingly contested with a growing number of state and private actors. So it's becoming also a critical theater of competition. Taken together, these developments across the world show that global security threats are converging. They are no longer isolated and they reinforce one another, and they directly affect Europe and the Netherlands. But the topic that you've been probably hearing and reading mostly about lately is hybrid warfare. The Netherlands is a target. Our strong support for Ukraine, our role as a host to major international institutions, and our geographical location as a hub make us very vulnerable. Russia increasingly deploys hybrid operations inside Europe. Espionage, cyber attacks, disinformation, sabotage, political interference and manipulation of energy supplies can be called a weaponization of everything. And these actions are carried out not only by Russian state services, but also by diffuse networks of actors across Western societies. They are designed to create fear, divide Western nations, undermine support for Ukraine, weaken trust, and erode the foundations of our democratic institutions. Here we are back at the lecture. And these forms of aggressions, they are cheap, they are effective, and very difficult to attribute. And they are not clearly regulated by international law. They stay below the threshold of NATO Articles 5. And that leads us, the West in this case, to what Elizabeth Ra coined a defender's dilemma. In this dilemma, defenders must protect every potential target, from the critical infrastructure to information system, while the attackers only need to find one weakness to succeed. And this imbalance makes the defense very costly, complex, and reactive. Additionally, the reaction is always suboptimal. If we do nothing, we'll lose credibility. If we react strongly, we run the risk of serious and costly, deadly escalations. And if we react in a similar way, we risk exactly what we try to protect, namely an open and free rule-based democracy. So, where does that leave us? What should our response be? I have 5 options. I'm going to try to end in an optimistic manner. We must strengthen deterrence and defense with our NATO and European allies. Second, we must build resilience across society and not just within the armed forces. We must do it in cooperation with the whole population, including companies, schools, universities, institutions, and individuals. Third, we need to deepen our international cooperation, not only within the West, not only with NATO and the EU, also with like-minded partners across the world, especially in the Indo-Pacific and Africa. Fourth, we must invest in strategic autonomy. And fifth, we must adopt forward-looking approaches to security, anticipating future threats and embracing innovation and integrating emerging technologies. Finally, as a country, maybe as an academic institution, we must protect and promote the pillars of parliamentary democracy. We must urge ourselves as well to act accordingly. So, I think this was my 8 minutes. The global security landscape is changing rapidly. The threats we face are real, they are growing and they are interconnected. But with strong alliances, resilient societies, and strategic foresight, I believe our democracy is and can be strong enough to overcome these threats. Thank you.
We are waiting for microphones to put that our way in. Yeah.
Yes, we can start with the debate. And I would like to start the debate with an initial statement. We heard Mr. Grapperhaus talk a lot about freedom of speech, freedom of academic expression. And my question is what if academic freedom is going too far? So academia are speaking out on a different way. What's your opinion about academic freedom going too far?
Well, in the definition I gave from science, I cannot really see how academic freedom can go too far. And I have not so much spoken about freedom of expression. It was all related to the freedom of science and of the academy. But, maybe I'm a zealot or an evangelist, if you want. I see no limitations to true science and academic freedom.
So I do think it's very important to distinguish between freedom of expression and academic freedom. They are two different things. So as a scholar, you benefit from academic freedom in the sense that you should be able to research and teach what you want. The universities should be relatively autonomous and self-regulated, and there should be integrity to campus life, as well as the possibility for scholars to participate in the public debate in their role as scholars. That does mean that your freedom of expression as a citizen should be kept separate from your academic freedom to participate in the public debate in the areas in which you have expertise. But what is very important in your question, in the question whether scholars can go too far and can also confuse the two, certainly that can happen. But what is also crucial to academic freedom is that it is up to the academic community to self-regulate these kinds of problems. So that is up to the academic community to then find ways to, make sure that we deal with that in appropriate ways. And it's certainly not up to politics to regulate the community for that reason. And I think that is one of the tensions that we now see, that politicians often try to impose principles on academia, whereas academia is very capable to self-regulate many of the problems that politicians point out.
Thank you. Marenne, a question for you. You talked about the threats our democracy has, but how do we see those threats? What are threats?
I can do this. No, that's okay. I think I just highlighted quite a number of threats. So that's what we see, and we have our own intel services to detect those threats. We have cooperation with intel services abroad. We have political networks. We have diplomatic networks. That's how we see many threats. But we also, we work closely with researchers, with think tanks, with academia. So we just get our information from everywhere. And I think it's important to keep testing that information. So to know the difference between an incident and a trend. So we need to watch things over time. Yeah. If I may add to that, because one of the really interesting things is, I think, that the distinction between outside threats and inside threats is slowly disappearing. And a lot of the sort of direct evidence that citizens encounter of the threats that we face are actually within our own democratic system. One of the most relevant pieces of investigative journalism of the last week was demonstrating that bots from across different regions, especially from Nigeria and other African countries, had tried to impact on the spread of disinformation in the electoral campaign for the 2025 elections, and here we have the link between our two research areas, particularly tried to promote far-right parties and influencers and other far-right actors in the context of the campaign.
So our threat is from extreme right on our democracy.
Well, that is one of the threats from the far right. But it directly ties into the external threats as well, because not only do they pose a risk for our own liberal democracies, they also operate on behalf of international threats such as Russia. There's sufficient evidence that a lot of far-right parties are actively sponsored by Russia, both in terms of support and network, but also in some cases financially. So that, the threat has become very intertwined, what is a geopolitical threat and what is an internal threat to liberal democracy. And in both areas, far-right parties play an important role. They're certainly not the only threat to our current liberal democracies, but they're an important element.
An open question for all three speakers. Could we defend ourselves from far-right as a threat on our democracy? Is there a possibility from the army maybe, or from in the law?
I think one of the last things you should do is to get in your army for your own country. We've seen examples of that.
And other viewings about a limitation for far-right?
Well, so of course, let me first say that we need to differentiate between different levels of threats within the far right, between the extreme right and the radical right. So extreme right parties are anti-democratic per se, so they pose a very big risk, also because they don't eschew violence. And we are, of course, faced with the threat from extreme right activists in the Netherlands. We've seen that very clearly in the demonstrations that took place before the elections, where both journalists, police, and party headquarters were attacked. But many political scientists today also classify the Forum for Democracy as extreme right. One, because the party has repeatedly stated that it no longer believes in the parliamentary process, but believes in organizing a counter-society. But also because one of its parliamentarians has been, convicted for incitement to violence. So that is sort of a key indicator that you should think of that party in that way. So in that way, it's also quite concerning that this particular party has gained in the elections. But that's a different kind of challenge to democracy than that posed by radical right parties such as the PVV and Ja 21 that accept democracy as a process with free and fair elections, parliament, government, etc., but have very complicated relationship with certain individual freedoms and rights, such as the freedom of religion, for example, where they clearly differentiate between Christianity and Judaism on the one hand and Islam on the other. But also with separations of power, because they give prime sovereignty to parliament and don't believe in constraints from the judiciary on parliamentary power, and in rule of law, in the sense that the rule also applies to those in government when the far right governs itself. So there's different natures of the threats, and that also means that different responses are required. So for where it comes to the extreme right, we're very much in the domain of intelligence and security, in prevention programs, in de-radicalization programs, etc. When we're dealing with the radical right, which is, just a legitimate actor within our liberal democratic system, it's just also an actor where we time and time again need to make clear distinction what is permissible in a liberal democratic system and what's not, and explain to citizens why individual freedoms and rights are so important, why a rule-based society is so important. And part of that is civic education. So, if I could have one dream, it would be to invest more in civic education, because I think we really need it at this point. But it also means having a liberal democratic system that, in terms of representation, functions much better. There's reasons why citizens are dissatisfied and voting for radical right parties, and many of those reasons are valid. Sorry, that was a very long answer to what was a brief question.
I almost forgot the question already. It's okay. Thank you. When we go back to the big question, democracy under threat, we now talked about internal threats. I would like to talk more about external threats. And then I would also have a question again for you. You talked about all the specific areas where our threats are from. You mentioned Russia, but are there more areas where you think is now a biggest threat to our democracy?
Well, I think the combination, I'm not going to repeat my lecture, but the combination of the global trends and the cooperation between Russia and China, China's ambitions, China's assertive behavior, both in the South Chinese Sea, but also online. Sorry. So Russia and China would be the short answer, and their cooperation.
And then maybe back to Ferd with academic freedom of speech. We talked about how important it is that academics have the freedom, and also about they don't have the freedom or they are going too far. How do you think it's the most important to implant that the freedom of academia is still there and will be there?
Well, I think we've had quite some interest just now in extreme right. I think it's much more important to look at the so-called more moderate part of our society. I'm not so much making a difference between all sorts of extreme right parties. Any party that implicitly propagates intolerance and leading to violence is extreme. that counts. Dat counts for Ja 21. Keep your ears open. Ja 21, PVV, Forum for Democracy. They're all extreme right. I don't see them as radical right. That's much more interesting. That right-wing, reasonable parties in the past have shown that I think they're much more a threat to democracy. Why? Because under some cover of in March this year, we had I was witness to that from the perspective of Leiden. The meeting itself. We can change. Okay. Maybe this one works. But I just want to say there's a lot of fake news in South. But what I want to say is that I found it shocking that politicians from right, the reasonable right and reasonable left parties were lobbying for universities, not so much on the basis of quality, but regional position. I think that is contrary to academia, to academic freedom. The university is for science, not for whatever regional interest. Maybe this is a stone in the boat. So to get back to academic freedom, biggest threat is, and this was why I was saying it, rose from people who, well, more or less are your reasonable neighbor, but they're not, because in the end they bend to unjust arguments to cut science. And I really put that before you. I think our chair here stepped down per September. Annetje Otto has really had a hard struggle. Next time I bring my own amp. Annetje Otto has had a real hard struggle, I can assure you, to have universities such as Leiden not being hit by what this cabinet was doing to mutilate university education. So what I say is, yes, there is extreme right, but they more or less need to see from afar. It's very important that we, as reasonable white peoples, keep our minds straight, think about democracy and about academics.
A reaction from Sarah about the statement, not only far right.
Well, I mean, it's absolutely right that we see that mainstream parties, in a response to the success of the far right, also increasingly behave in ways that are problematic from a liberal democratic perspective. I mean, we've seen a lot of examples of that, especially in the last year. Again, I will have to single out the VVD for that. We've had the example, for example, where a majority in the parliament supported the motion to supposedly ban Antifa, which in the Netherlands is something that is up to the judiciary, not to...
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. So it's very problematic from the point of view of separation of powers. We've also had the situation where both of the leadership of the VVD and the Minister of Justice of the VVD were unwilling to condemn the extreme right violence that took place during protests in The Hague, even though the intelligence and security services had made it very clear that this was extreme right, and really, drawing the line there and being clear on that violence is not acceptable in a liberal democracy, and recognizing where that violence is coming is very important to maintain a democratic ethos in a society. We've, of course, had the debate about, this noodwet asiel, which is also not particularly suitable for a rule of law-based country. So there's been many examples where you see that mainstream parties also engage in this type of behavior, and that's especially problematic because on paper, the Netherlands has very good democratic institutions. If you look at the system that we have with proportional representation, with the fact that we have a bicameral system, with other kinds of features that we have, it is really solid on paper, right? You can't design a system that is much better. The only thing that would really add to it is to also have federalism so that the different layers of government also check each other. But other than that, it's pretty strong. But as Popper argued, I need to have strong institutions. They need to be like fortresses, and they should be well manned. If the actors in the institutions don't take it upon them to defend liberal democracy and to adhere to democratic liberal principles, the institutions themselves are not very, not very effective. And in that respect, it's quite interesting that we've seen some of the strongest upholding of liberal democratic principles actually from bureaucrats in the different departments that have made a really good effort at explaining to different ministers from different kinds of parties that some of the ideas that they had were not in line with liberal democratic principles.
Do you see something of that in your own ministry?
No.
That's also an answer. When looking at the time, I would also like to invite you to ask some questions to our speakers. So do people maybe have a question? Or I see a hand going. I don't know if there are microphones. I think they are. This one? Yeah. For the lady.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for all your very interesting speeches and the discussion here. I was wondering, Sarah, question to you. You said that the rise of voting for the radical and extreme right was maybe in part for legitimate reasons. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that. And also taking into the theme of tonight, how that maybe Parliament then itself is a threat to democracy.
Yeah, so, explaining the success of the far right can be very easy or it can be very complex. The very easy version is citizens that support the far right are first and foremost motivated by their concern about immigration. They believe that immigration is the biggest societal challenge that we face. But if you unpack that and explore why they have these beliefs, then they are often not related to the presence of migrants in their direct environment. In fact, see that far right scores much better in rural and peripheral areas of the Netherlands where there's fewer migrants. And what then feeds into, that success is partly economic factors. So economic decline, mobile citizens, decline in public and private services, but also a feeling of regional resentment, that the region is not being recognized also politically as being relevant. So in that respect, it's very understandable what some of those politicians did for regional universities. And it's to some extent correct. Many regions in the Netherlands are underrepresented in our parliaments if we look at the composition of their backgrounds. But more broadly speaking, our parliament is just very unrepresentative in descriptive terms. It's completely highly educated. So there's many groups of citizens that are right in not feeling represented in certain ways. And part of that is a result of the way of how our political parties have professionalized, and our politicians have become career politicians who have not, worked extensively in other sectors and then taken up a political position, but have had political careers within the political parties that they're active for. So in that respect, there are certain ways in which representative democracy is partly working. And part of that has to do also with the fact that we have much weaker political parties than we had when we had well-functioning representative democracies, with a large mass member basis for representation within parties themselves.
Short question, the answer. More question. Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful speeches. I have a question first and foremost for Marenne. If others are willing to join in, please. So my question is, in your presentation, you've said that, and also Sarah, the threats around the West, that the amount of liberal democracies have decreased over the past years. But on the other hand, if at least how I see it, in the past years, for example, the European Union has expanded, NATO has expanded. What has changed? How come we're under threat when, at least on the surface, Europe has been, the former Eastern Bloc countries have joined in. Have we missed out on something as the West? Is it just natural developments in the world that maybe we cannot have had effect on? What is your view on this? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and it's a familiar narrative, I should say. European Union has expanded, so has NATO recently, and there are still countries that would like to be part of the EU and or NATO. You can see it as Putin does as Western expansionism. You can see it as NATO expansionism, and you can perceive that as a threat to Russia. It is not designed as a threat. It is not military expansionism. It's territorial and political expansionism, if it's expansionism at all. The threat that we see comes from an expansionist Russia going into Ukraine. And the information that we have tells us that it is not sure. We are not sure that it will stop with the Donbass or after Ukraine. So yes, we have a political and institutional expansion. We have grown as a EU and as a NATO, but it's not military expansionism. I think that is a very big and very important difference. Thank you. You want to join in?
Short question. Let's maybe while with that.
Hi. Thank you for your speeches. My question is about how do you see the rise of individualism in our country as a threat to democracy, meaning that individualism creates maybe not so much opportunity to identify yourself with society as a whole?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I mean, you could argue that individualism does contribute to the decline of political parties because citizens find it more difficult to identify with one particular party that really represents them on many different issues. But at the same time, we see that doesn't go for all kinds of other civic engagement in terms of, for example, NGO membership, etc. So there's a very clear difference between how citizens relate to political parties as organizations and to other kinds of value-based organizations. It is relevant in the context of the extreme and the radical right, because we do know that citizens that are less embedded in social networks, that are more isolated, and especially those that are no longer part of traditional organizations like the church or trade unions, are more susceptible to voting for far-right parties. And also in the case of extreme right activism, we know that that is not only ideology-based, but there's also an element of seeking identity and camaraderie in joining such organizations in the same way that someone could for that reason join a motor club or become a hooligan for a football party. It has very similar dynamics behind it in terms of what citizens seek to find in these types of organizations.
Maybe the last question from the audience was tonight.
All right. Thank you very much for all your speeches you've given so far. I was hoping to end on a more positive note, speaking to all of our audience that we have here today and also online. Maybe you have a word of advice on how we can use our individual freedoms that we still currently can enjoy and the impact that we as individuals here can make to try and reverse this process or at least prevent it from further deteriorating.
Oh, well, yeah, I didn't want to go first again, so I must.
Do you mind if I give an answer?
Yeah, so go ahead.
Sorry. Well, this is, I think, comes exactly after the question about individuals. I think it is very important that you not just are a member of society, but that you join a political party, that you join whatever society that relates to academic background, Amnesty International, or whether it's the local korfbal club. I think you're laughing. I have read that sports clubs all have a big problem these days with manning. This is okay. We use it all the time. Madam, to come back to you, I think participation in and then drawing others into it as well. Because what I said is if we look away or if we just let it erode, and we have very strong forces to work against, and what's happening in the United States has development there will have consequences here. So be active in any way in society and vent your opinion and speak up against, those who say that are not academic.
For the last question of tonight, we would like to switch to the live stream so that people who are not here with us, but online. No questions? Well, no questions from online. That's easy for the speakers tonight. Then we are closing the debate on this note, on this positive note. And then I would like to give the floor to the director of it, LIF. And a big applause for our speakers at first.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to have some words, to address some words to you. What a wonderful night, and how inspiring it was to listen to you, to your speakers, and to the debate, to the panel. This week and the days around it, on over 40 locations in 40 cities in the Netherlands and around the world, Leiden alumni gather to have evenings like this, Cleveringa meetings for alumni. And I must say, tonight would not have been possible without all the efforts of the Cleveringa Committee of Leiden. I know that already in the summertime you started preparing this evening by bringing these wonderful speakers together and by inspiring all of you here in the room, but also online, to be here tonight. So I would like all of you to ask you to give a warm round of applause to the Cleveringa Committee Leiden. And next to that, I would also like to thank you for being here with us tonight, here in the room and also online. Especially in this year, where we celebrate 450 years Leiden University. Since 1575 up until today, academics educate our students as they did the days that you studied here, maybe some years ago, maybe some more years ago. And Leiden researchers commit themselves to find solutions to the challenges of today. Like you saw maybe in the movie, on the video in the beginning of this evening, Leiden researchers try to find new treatments for children and young adults, in physical and in psychological needs. They try to find solutions to contribute to a sustainable future, and also to contribute to peace and democracy, like the theme was tonight. Thank you for your presence, and also your contribution, because I know a lot of you support your university financially, is very important, especially in this time. And your contribution and your support is not only financially, it also is a powerful message that you value science and that you believe in the power of science and the value of your university. And this is very important to students, to Leiden researchers, because they know that there are people like you who believe that their work is important, and that there are people who are willing to contribute and to make this possible. So I would like to say, on behalf of Leiden researchers and also the students, thank you very much for your support, and I hope to speak to some of you at the borrel. I think after the meeting we have the borrel, so I hope to speak to you there. Thank you for being here.